Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's meeting. It's not ready? Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny panel. During the live broadcast, members and officers are asked to please ensure that mobile phones are placed in silent mode and that microphones are switched off whilst not in use. Agenda item 1. Would member services please report any apologies for absence? Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 2. We are being asked to approve the public minutes at pages 3 to 12 of the public agenda pack as a correct record of the meeting which took place on the 9th of September 2024. Can I ask any member who does not agree with the minutes to indicate that now? I see no objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as a correct record of the meeting, so they are now agreed. Agenda item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent items for consideration today. So we move on to agenda item 4, interests. Agenda item 4 is to receive any declarations of interest under the Local Code of Conduct or any interest under the Code of Conduct on planning matters in respect of any items to be discussed at this meeting. If you have anything to declare, please can you inform the meeting now? No hands are raised. Thank you. So we move on to agenda item 5. The next item on the agenda is the annual meeting with the leader and chief executive, the report for which appears at pages 13 to 22 of the agenda. Please go ahead and begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. The report has been presented, and I know that the committee's had a chance on an informal basis to discuss it, and I'm sure you've all had a chance to read it at your leisure as well. And the information is being presented very much in the same way that we've presented information in previous years, and it provides the necessary factual basis upon which it's going to be possible for us to be questioned. With so many things which are in this report, however, we're talking about matters which are going to happen in the future and which are, by their very nature, unpredictable and difficult to quantify. So there is always a difficulty as far as that is concerned in being precise. And some of the numbers which are involved here, particularly on the finance side, may well look daunting. In fact, they are daunting, but it's not as though they've never looked daunting in the past. It's something which is not unusual for us. That's not meant to be an excuse or to get out of answering questions. It's just to state that what we are facing is not unusual. In fact, it is a continuation of what has been said for the last, well, certainly for the last 11 years, 10 years, which I've been a councillor, and that is that this authority has a structural deficit. And those words have been used by our Chief Finance Officer at every single budget meeting that I've been at since 2015. And I'm quite confident that we do have some items in here which show how we get rid of the structural deficit, but it's going to take a lot of effort, and it won't happen overnight. But a lot of work is being done on that structural deficit. Meanwhile, we continue to need to balance the books on a year-by-year basis. So very open to any questions that anyone has, but asking questions based on this report, I think, is a very good way of holding me, and for that matter, the Chief Executive, to account. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. This item is now open for discussion. Are there any questions or comments, please? I believe, Councillor Hay, you did have a question.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, actually. On page 15 of the report, under finance, it states that 24-25 in-year is predicting a deficit if interventions are not met. What does the deficit look like? What interventions are we talking about? And what is the likelihood of the item not being met?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Councillor Hay, for the question. As ever, at this stage, things are uncertain. And the strange thing is that even when you get to the end of the year, it's still a bit uncertain about what the deficit or surplus is going to be for the year. There are a wide range of possible predictions of what the number will be. We don't know what things will carry over from one year to the next. We don't know what special items there may be. And this year, we have a particular item of uncertainty involved. And that item of uncertainty is in 9 days' time, when the new Chancellor gives her first budget. I could speculate on that at great length about what may be in that, and that's probably a fairly pointless thing to do. All sorts of things have been trailed. Common sense would suggest a whole host of things might happen as far as local government finance is concerned, but the truth is, no one outside a couple of dozen people within Whitehall, no one actually knows what the effect on Fenland District Council is going to be, let alone the effect on the whole country of what comes forward in the budget. So I cannot overemphasize just how much I'm waiting. We were all waiting to see just what is included within the budget and in the papers which are published in the week following the budget, the detailed papers, for us to try and get some idea about how that will affect us, not merely in future years, but even in this current year of 2024-25. And in this current year, if we're looking at what the pressures have been, they haven't been really very difficult to predict. We continue to have significant pressures on homelessness and temporary accommodation. We continue to have had pressures on our planning budget, particularly in terms of staff recruitment, and we continue to have pressures both from the port function and our function as a strategic harbour authority, and the levies from internal drainage boards. Now, on all of these issues, action has been taken, continues to be taken, but they all have long-term answers rather than short-term answers. And whilst in some cases, some of the pressures I've just been talking about may be ameliorated to some extent in the current year, 24-25, I'm looking far more towards 25-26 and 26-27 before many of these problems, which are fundamentally the structural issues I talked about before, the structural deficit I talked about before, it will take that much time for these really to come to fruition and to show any significant effect. So the likelihood of them not being met in 24-25 is very high. That's one of the reasons why more than 4 years ago now, more than 5 years ago now, I set up the budget equalisation reserve, and full council agreed to it. And the purpose of the budget equalisation reserve was accepting that there'd been a strategic over budgeting effectively over many years, which was just proved empirically to be true. Given that fact, I wanted to be able to build up a specific reserve over a period of time where the difference between how much we budgeted for and what the final outturn was, where that was a positive difference, and it was for the first 3 years of operation of the scheme, that difference went into a reserve to allow for the period of transition that I saw even back then that we were going to need to go through, where we would need to address some of those structural issues. And we built up a figure of some £1.6 million in that reserve. of which we used £200,000 this year in relation, apologies for using round figures, but it's easier, of which we used £200,000 in respect of the deficit we had last year. The deficit we had last year was interesting in that, and it again shows how careful we've got to be with the numbers. When we were debating, both ONS and Cabinet, almost at this time last year, when we were looking at the provisional outturn figures for 23-24, we were looking at a figure of some £800,000 or so. That figure, by the time we finally got past the year end and were able to produce a real outturn figure, was reduced to £200,000. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I am unhappy with the work which is done by the Finance Department. I'm not. What, in fact, I specifically have asked the Finance Department to do is to be consistent. Don't try to be clever. Don't try to give us what we want to see. Continue to do the work in the way in which you've done for many years in the past, because that provides us with a strong basis upon which to make decisions in the future. So yes, the interventions will not be sufficient, in my opinion, to be able to produce a surplus in the year 24-25. I could be proven wrong when it comes to the budget. I doubt it, but I could be. But we have sufficient continuing reserves, and I have sufficient continuing other opportunities, even in 24-25, to ensure that we will continue to be able to have utilisable reserves, separate from the basic general reserve. We'll be able to utilise those reserves to get us over the period when these longer-term interventions actually come into play and start producing the results that we want. We may not be able to do that completely, in which case we may need to, quite apart from having a transformation agenda 2, we may now need to go to a comprehensive spending review 3. We may need to do that, but that's all part of the running of a local authority. You can never sit back and think, we've done it all now, we can now coast along. You always have to challenge, you always have to look for opportunities for greater efficiency, and we will continue to do that. I'm sorry, I hope I've answered your question as far as it can be answered, because it's not the sort of question, through you, Chairman, it's not the sort of question which can be answered with a yes or no. And I'm sorry about the uncertainties involved in all of that, but there is a bigger picture here. It's one which we have had in mind for quite some considerable time. We are working on this bigger picture in the various streams that I've been talking about, and I have confidence that we will be able to meet that structural challenge within the financial framework that we've set up.
Thank you very much for that. That does answer my question. It's heartening to know that you're fairly confident that there will be enough usable reserves, providing nothing really untoward goes against us.
I didn't say usable reserves, I said identified reserves, because there are other usable reserves I have no intention of touching, let alone the general reserve, the basic general reserve. So I'm very much hoping not to use all usable reserves for this purpose. It's specifically identified reserves.
Sorry, that's me using the wrong word. I do have another question. We've been doing an accommodation review, and within the report, at the time of this report was written, we still didn't know the decision from County Council. It says within the report that the decision was scheduled for the 15th of October. Have we had a decision from County Council on what they're going to do with Hereward Hall? And have we had any talks with the County Council on what the possible use of Hereward Hall going forward could be?
Thank you. We continue to have discussions with County Council on the subject of Hereward Hall, and in fact we continue to have productive and friendly discussions with County Council on that matter. I was at that relevant meeting on the 15th of October, and for the life of me, at County Council, and for the life of me I can't remember if that was a confidential item or not. So, and it may well be the Chief Executive can manage to intervene and can manage to be definitive here. But we continue to be on track. In fact, I now recall I had to declare an interest, so I didn't actually speak on that particular part of the debate. It is in the public arena that there is an interest in the disposal of Hereward Hall. No contractual agreement has yet been reached, and I wouldn't want to say too much here about any of the detail involved, because it could prejudice our interests from FDC's side, and I could also be guilty of infringing the confidentiality required from the CCC side as well. So I can't say too much. Our Chief Executive, however, I'm quite confident will know exactly how far he can give information, and if Chairman Councillor Hay wouldn't mind, I think hearing from the Chief Executive on this might be very useful.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. I'd like to bring in the Chief Executive, Paul Mead, now.
Thank you, Chairman. So not a great deal to say over and above what Councillor Bowden's just said, but I can confirm that the County Council in its meeting on the 15th of October did identify Herald Hall as an asset that they are seeking to dispose of. So obviously that underpins the ongoing conversations we're having with the County Council. There's no commitment being made. Obviously we need to now work through a thorough full business case stage to identify whether all of the detail ultimately stacks up. The County Council are in the process of communicating that decision with their staff, because those staff that are currently within Herald Hall clearly will need to be moved and placed elsewhere.
Thank you.
I've got one more question.
Yes, I was just going to come to you as a follow-up.
My last question is to do with the business plan. Under performance management, performance indicators, there's a bullet point: report regularly on service performance to the corporate management team, councillors and the public. And under the governance, financial control and risk management, bullet point: complying with data protection and general data protection regulations and requirements. This is in regard to ARP. It's come to my attention that there has been 1 or 2 data breaches of late. I want to know, are there any issues with the service? And it's also come to my attention that when there are data breaches, these are not reported to the cabinet office, the cabinet member responsible for that area. And it worries me if things like that aren't being reported to one cabinet member. Do we have similar instances right across the cabinet where data breaches are not being reported?
Thank you very much, Councillor Hay. Councillor Bowden, would you like to respond on this?
This really should be responded to by Councillor Jan French, but unfortunately she's not well at the moment. So I will do my best, but again, I'm sure that the Chief Executive keeps his eye on all of these things, will fill in details where it is possible to do so. The first thing that needs to be borne in mind is the sheer number of communications which ARP have. Now, I'm going to restrict myself on ARP merely to those relating to Fenland. Obviously, they cover quite a number of other councils as well, but let's just talk about the Fenland ones. And when you look at the sheer number of communications that there are, you need to put any potential breaches into that context. And I think it may well be in the report somewhere that it's specified what the numbers are in terms of how many breaches there have been. But the number of reported breaches was a very small number. It was, off the top of my head, I've got 58, but we were talking about a number under 100 in the year. Of those, on immediate investigation, a third or more were deemed not to be breaches at all. Then those which are deemed potentially to be breaches are reported to the Information Commissioner's Office. And when they are reported, then we wait for a feedback. The number we ended up with both this year and, if I remember, last year, if I remember correctly, where it was determined that there was a breach, I think it was 4 in each year, and again, the Chief Executive may correct me on that. And they are relatively minor breaches. Now, I say relatively minor breaches. Any breach of GDPR is wrong and needs to be corrected, and there's a feedback loop into ARP to try to make sure that whatever caused the breach won't happen again. But we're talking about relatively small matters, such as an address being wrong or an email address being revealed which shouldn't have been revealed. And we're not talking about major problems which the ICO have come back to us and tried to levy a penalty or tell us that we've got to change our procedures. Having said that, we have changed our procedures. Every time something has gone wrong, there has been feedback to try and make sure it doesn't happen again. given the sheer number, and we're talking, I think we're talking well over 1 million transactions in a year in terms of information being passed around. Given the sheer number of those, I'm sorry to say that aiming for zero is always going to be an optimistic target to go for, but it's the correct target to go for. And for us to have failed by the very small number that we have on relatively small matters as far as GDPR breaches are concerned is a good sign. But again, we have to aim for zero. Again, the Chief Executive may correct me on some of this because I'm doing all of that from memory. I can't quite find where I've seen that in the reports.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. The Chief Executive has indicated that he would like to speak, so I'd like to bring him in now.
Thank you, Chairman. Very little to add. Councillor Bowden's covered quite a bit of detail there. Just to reinforce the fact that obviously if we do identify the data breaches, they're reported into the Information Commissioner's office. If there's ever any doubt in our mind, we would always contact the Information Commissioner's office and set out where we think there is a potential breach. Then that puts the ball into the court of the ICO to look into the detail that we provide to determine whether or not a thorough sort of investigation with potential sanctions to follow is relevant. I think it's worth saying, to reiterate the point that Councillor Bowden mentioned, that in respect of the data breaches that we've seen, there's been no further action required. But again, a really important point to note is whenever there are data breaches, even if they're at a relatively low level with no specific ICO actions associated with them, as Councillor Bowden suggested, it's always a very valuable learning opportunity to reflect on what's happened, why it's happened, to make sure that if any corrective action needs to be put into place to prevent the same low-level data breach occurring again, we do everything possible to ensure that that's the case.
Councillor Bowden and then Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Chairman. And I have finally found the information that I was so frantically looking for. Just to break down those 4 items of breach relating to Fenland Council, which were correctly reported to the ICO. 2 of them were a matter of incorrect emails which were being held. 1 was an incorrect telephone number which was being held, with a text reminder being sent, and 1 of them was a mail packaging error by our postal provider. So those were the nature of the 4 actual breaches which were reported to the ICO and which they said no further action needs to be taken on, but we will learn.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Hay.
I'd just like to come back and say, albeit the numbers are small, do you not think that the portfolio holders should be made aware when there are breaches? They're currently not being made aware.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, and of course the portfolio holder isn't here to speak for herself, but to the best of my knowledge, she is informed at portfolio holder briefings. To the best of my knowledge, she is. And I get the impression from the fact that, Chairman, that Councillor Hay is shaking her head, that she believes that's not the case, in which case we will certainly get a change take place as far as that's concerned, but maybe Councillor Hay can advise me.
I've actually spoken to Councillor French and she was not made aware.
Then, Chairman, what I will do, take as an action from this meeting, is to ensure that that's fed back to the officers so that at all future portfolio holder briefings that the portfolio holder has, that matters to do with ICO rulings and to do with potential breaches of GDPR are brought to her attention at each portfolio holder briefing meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden, Chief Exec Paul Med and Councillor Hay. Does anyone have any other points to raise to discuss on this agenda item? There are no further speakers, therefore I would like to thank you for your attendance and the information that you provided. And so we go on to agenda item 6. The next item on the agenda is to receive an update in relation to the Commercial Investment Strategy and Investment Board. The report is at pages 23 to 32 of the agenda. Please go ahead and begin your presentation.
Okay, once again, I'm aware, Chairman, that you've had the opportunity, all of you, to read the report, and you've also had the opportunity to discuss it among yourselves. And so I'm not going to repeat everything which is in the report. That's pointless. What I can say is how disappointed I am personally with this. After 5 years as leader, I was hoping to be able to produce, by this stage, a much more positive report than we have in front of us. I'm not trying to say that it's bad news that we've got, it's just that we've lost the opportunity, I think, to have some good news. And that's primarily been because of the level of interest rates that has been over the last few years, which has been higher than had been anticipated and makes it more difficult to make commercial investments which are sound and sensible from a local government context. It's to do with additional restrictions which have been placed on us by central government, not allowing us to borrow for return, which we could have done previously and which made good commercial sense to do, but unfortunately which a small number of councils around the country badly abused, some of them, not all, but some of them getting into massive financial difficulty as a result. And it's also because many of the opportunities which existed a few years ago just don't exist in the market now. It's easy for me to look back and think, oh, if only I'd been able to start this 4 years earlier, we'd now have a wonderful property portfolio behind us, which would be making a really substantial contribution to the annual revenue budget. But there's no use wishing for what didn't happen in the past. I have had some 75 commercial opportunities brought to my attention by officers, or which I've found myself mostly brought to my attention by officers. Of those 75, ultimately only 2 were ones which I said, yes, let's go ahead and do them. And of those 2, 1 pulled out for their own commercial reasons before completion. So we ended up, in terms of the external funding of external investments, of having 1 external investment, which is the warehouse and operation in Wisbech, which is working very well indeed, has a good tenant, is producing a good return for us, and is making a contribution annually. I was hoping for 5, 10, 15 of those by this stage. For the reasons which I gave before, that hasn't happened. We haven't given up, but just at the moment, it's still the case that interest rates, real interest rates, are still at such a level as to make it very difficult indeed for a local authority prudently, and I'll use that word carefully, prudently to make an investment and get a good return on that investment when you've got the private sector out there who can very often do the job a lot more efficiently and a lot more effectively than we can, because we've got all sorts of bureaucratic hoops that we have to jump through. So it makes it very difficult to be in that position, and it tends to be only when there is a special case. For example, we might own land next to some land which is becoming available. It's only when there may be some marriage value potentially involved in that. So it's only when there's a special case that we are likely to be able to find something which we can reasonably invest in. And I use the word reasonably invest because, as I said, there are massive opportunities. We've got a figure in the budget, I've forgotten what it is now, in the reserves, of whether it was authorisation for 20 million or 25 million of investments. We've barely scratched that. And in my opinion, correctly so. I think that you would be hauling me over the coals if we had been investing left, right and centre without doing due diligence and without being cautious. And if I've been overcautious in all of this, then I apologise and I'll hold my hand up for that, but I wasn't going to be over-reckless. And there's always the danger, because you can never fully tell on any investment what's going to happen, but there's always the danger that you get excited by projections and by spreadsheets and by looking for 50 years ahead and seeing that you'll make £2 million out of an investment and think, oh, great, we've got to go ahead with that then. And unfortunately, in some of the local authorities around the country, that's exactly what they did, and some of them have absolutely come a cropper. So as far as the external investments are concerned, I apologise that there's only been 1 of them, but also I don't apologise that I haven't been reckless in pursuing what I'd really hoped would have been far more productive than is the case now. Then to look at our investments, what I'll call our internal investments, we have been progressing 2 in particular, very substantially indeed. There's plenty of information about that. Happy for questions to be asked about that. There were always commercial considerations to be had on that, but the basic underlying purpose behind how we were going to make revenue money out of those particular pieces of land continues to operate and operate well. But I do have to be very careful on both of those developments, the one in Chatteris and the one in Wisbech. I've got to be very careful not to say anything which is potentially commercially sensitive and could prejudice our position in the forthcoming year or two. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. If it's all right with him, I'd like to bring in Councillor Roy because he had a question related to the investment, particularly property. So, Councillor Roy, if it's all right with you,
Thank you,
present
Chair.
your question.
Councillor Bowden, there's been a significant investment in Elm, namely, of a property that, you know, around about the £800,000 mark. And there's still a lot of remedial work to bring it up for the purposes that it's intended for. Do we have some indicative costs and timelines of when we are going to get a return on our initial investment? Do we know when the returns will start coming in and how long that we kind of break even on that investment?
Thank you. Councillor Bowden, would you like
Thank you,
to?
Chairman. And I'd like to thank Councillor Roy for his question. I've got to be very careful here, and the reason I've got to be careful is we haven't purchased a property in Elm. Negotiations continue. We still haven't had exchange of contracts, and I don't want to in any way weaken the position of our officers in getting to a conclusion where we do purchase that property. Quite a bit of information was given about this in the in a fairly recent meeting, the last cabinet meeting, but it was given as a confidential, commercially sensitive appendix, and I must not even come close to digging into that information. I'm also a little bit, unhappy is the wrong word to use. If it were up to me, and lots of things aren't up to me, I wouldn't even have brought this in as an investment, because its primary purpose is to do with our statutory housing responsibilities, and I look at an investment as being something that you try to do in order to make some sort of return on it. This isn't being done for that purpose. So it makes it very difficult to answer any questions there may be about a yield or about a period of a payback period, because we're talking here about a capital scheme with additional capital monies, which is being progressed in order to reduce our revenue costs. And I'm not going to go into any more detail than that, other than to say that I watch this very carefully indeed. It's actually Councillor Hoy's portfolio rather than mine, but I watch this very, very carefully indeed. I get regular updates from officers. In fact, I sought out further update this morning before this meeting began, and I'll continue to watch it very carefully indeed. It is a very appropriate thing for overview and scrutiny to ask questions about after we have exchanged contracts, if you don't mind. But before the exchange of contracts, it would be prejudicial to our interests for me to say any more. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Roy, would you like to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for being concise and clarifying that situation. I think sometimes we see things in the media and people sort of take it the wrong way. So thank you for being open and honest with that.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Roy, and thank you, Councillor Bowden, for answering to the best of your ability in these circumstances. I'd now like to bring in Councillor Barber. So would you like to ask your question about the homes for older people?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there is reference in the report to 70 homes for older people with care needs in Wisbech. I'd just really like clarification. Is it actually 70 homes, or is it a home for 70 people? Because people with care needs, it may be difficult them having their own home.
Councillor Bowden, would you like to respond?
Again, in the absence of Councillor Hoy, probably it's right for me to respond again. Officers may wish to add to this. And I think it's a really good question because it's also easy for those of us who are involved in the detail of all of these things just to assume that everyone understands what the situation is because we understand it. And that's part of the function of O&S, to drag out some of the things which are not intentionally hidden, but where there are assumptions which are being made and which are so fundamental that they're not written down and they're not explained. So the situation is that we're talking here about an extra care scheme. And we already have extra care schemes in Finland. We've got one, there's a sanctuary one in March, there's a sanctuary one next to the hospital in Doddington, and we've got the Longhurst scheme in Whittlesea. And these schemes are for vulnerable residents who've been assessed by Cambridgeshire County Council, who've got the legal responsibility as the adults services provider. And they've, County Council have assessed these individuals as needing some form of care package, but not needing to go into care as such. So all of the accommodation that we're talking about, both at the 3 schemes I've already talked about and at the scheme that was mentioned by Councillor Barber, Chairman, in the 70 additional homes, all of the accommodation is comprised of self-contained flats with their own front door and with personal space, their own personal space, a living room, a kitchen, an accessible personal bathroom and a bedroom. So there are 70 individual flats in total, but they do have communal services available, including communal emergency services where necessary. There may be a smaller number of 2-bedroom flats within that, proposal. It's not been determined yet, but they will be part of the reserved matters pending the actual planning application coming forward. But to answer the basic question that Councillor Barber said, yes, they are 70 individual flats. And I'm sorry that it wasn't made clear. It was so obvious to all of us who've been doing it now for 2 or more years that sometimes we fail to put in the most basic information which is required.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Barber, would you like to come back?
Just thank you for that clarification.
I would like to now ask a question on behalf of Councillor Dr. Nawaz, who unfortunately is unable to be here this morning. Councillor Nawaz's question is, the CIS says it will be reviewed every 2 years, and I'm just wondering, is that too long? Perhaps an annual review would be more useful. If there is anything going wrong, it can therefore be picked up earlier rather than having to wait for 2 years. The committee could go through it on an annual basis.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Councillor Nawaz for that question. That review, which takes place every 2 years, is a formal review. It's a thorough review, and it states where we are. But it's not as though we wait 2 years and then we look at the overall service and then we think the strategy and think, what should we do and how should we do it? We are constantly looking at interest rates and at other opportunities which there are to see what changes are necessary or possible. So just because we have produced a report doesn't mean to say that we then sit back and just say, well, that's the report, we don't need to think any more about it for the next 2 years. It's a very, very fluid environment. It's not been as fluid in the last 2 years as I would have liked it to be. I'm hoping it's going to be more fluid in the next 2 years and that we're going to find more opportunities above and beyond what we see in that regular 2-year review. The 2-year review is a formal document, and it's correct that it's looked at in strategic terms. But in operational terms, you can't rely on something which is done every 2 years or even every 1 year. You've literally got to look at it almost on a daily basis. And believe it or not, we actually do look at things like interest rates on a daily basis to see what opportunities there may be within that. So that's why it's not really helpful necessarily to bring the formal big CIS review forward to make it once every year rather than once every 2 years. The strategy largely remains the same. The opportunities are very short term sometimes and ones which we have to react to very quickly indeed, otherwise we may miss out.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. So therefore, it's my understanding that it's almost a daily basis, that it's looked on almost a daily basis as far as the operational aspect of it is concerned. Can I just ask if it's looked at on an almost daily basis, which sounds to me that it would be the most prudent way, how is the information from that then gathered and acted upon in terms of moving towards the strategic review in 2 years?
Right, I should emphasise the daily examination is done by officers. I certainly don't do it on a daily basis. But having said that, the information is based on what's happening in the economy as a whole, and I do keep an eye on the economic situation in the country as a whole. So very often when something does happen, I'll be on the phone to, for example, our Section 151 officer to say, are you aware of this? And of course, he's already aware of it, and we then start having discussions about what can be done. So what happens is that if there is a significant change or a trend, or even the projection of a trend, we have informal discussions about it, so that we keep alert as to what the possibilities will be, but also it's brought up in portfolio holder briefings as well. But I don't rely on the portfolio holder briefings. I don't need to, because I have good communication, especially with Peter Catchpole, and when things are moving, when things are changing, we have discussions, and we will not allow the bureaucracy of the meeting schedule to get in the way of making sensible decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. The Chief Executive, Paul Mead, has indicated that he would like to speak, so I'll bring him in now.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to add to what Councillor Bowden has said, there is obviously the daily interaction on an informal basis, but it's worth mentioning from a formal governance and decision-making point of view, a lot of this information that's been looked at on a daily basis is reported back to the investment board. So we have that as part of our overall governance, and decisions that connect with the commercial investment strategy are presented to the members, the 3 members that sit on the investment board, for a decision to be taken.
Thank you, Paul, very much for that detailed explanation about the investment board as well. Peter Catchpole has indicated he would like to speak, so I'll bring him in now. Thank you. It's good to hear such confidence coming forward. Would anyone else like to speak on this agenda item? There are no further speakers. Therefore, I would like to thank you all for your attendance and the information provided. The report is duly noted. We move on to agenda item 7. Item 7 on the agenda is for panel members to receive a presentation on the progress of the Council's corporate priorities in relation to transformation and communications. The report can be found at pages 33 to 48 of the agenda. Please go ahead and present your report. Peter Catchpole.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce the report very briefly because we have the portfolio holder here, and the portfolio holder covers transformation, customer services and communications, all of which is in the report, which people will have read. So I'm more than happy now just to sort of hand over to the panel to ask questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a list of questions here. I think I'll go through them in turn. So I'd like to bring in Councillor Roy initially with his question regard to social media. So Councillor Roy, if you wouldn't mind speaking.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the social media question I had was that in the report it mentions Twitter and Facebook. Given the struggles we've had in recruitment in planning, there's no mention of LinkedIn, which is a powerful source of recruiting professionals. And I think we need to make more use of that, and I think that should have been put in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Roy. Councillor Tierney?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Roy. So I think it's basically it's an omission because we do have a LinkedIn account. The council does use it. Business matters are published to LinkedIn, so employment and such will also be there. In regards to LinkedIn, I think that's quite an interesting one because you will know that different social media companies rise and fall. It feels to me, I don't know if you would agree, that LinkedIn is kind of on the down slope at the moment, but not everyone would say that was true. So I would welcome members' opinions on our use of it going forwards, but we certainly do use it at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Roy, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I absolutely agree, Councillor Tierney, that social media rises and falls, and it depends what's in popularity. But I think we should be using every available resource to the council up to a point where it's no longer relevant. And I think certainly we find more professionals on LinkedIn at the moment than we do in other places. But there are other portals, and I completely agree with you that they may be looking at. So thank you for pointing out that it was an omission in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Roy. I would add that certainly it depends on industries, really. Some industries are more popular on LinkedIn than others. But yes, it's good to know that every available resource is being utilised. Councillor Roy, you had another question in relation to the shared CC... Oh, no, I'm sorry. Beg your pardon. It was Councillor Barber. You had a question on the shared CCTV services. Would you like to ask that now?
Thank you, Chair. My original question was in relation to the continuation of shared CCTV services with Peterborough City Council, how is the time divided and how effective is the service in responding specifically to Fenland District Council's requirements? My further question now is, given the financial problems Peterborough are having, are we getting any CCTV coverage at all?
Thank you, Councillor Barber.
Hello, thank you. And because it's quite a structured response that I think you need to make sure that the services are being delivered appropriately, we've got a written answer, then obviously I can just elaborate of answers afterwards of any questions that you've got. So the control room is staffed 24/7 with periods where we are singly crewed and others where we are doubly and then triple crewed. When triple crewed, operators follow a prioritisation model that ensures threat, risk and harm are managed effectively through incident management across all areas covered, including Fenland. Operators are then follow a clear patrol plan to ensure regular patrols of key camera areas, including all customers of SLAs, which is service level agreements, commitments, such as the town councils in Fenland. This ensures that even when single crewed, regular patrols of Fenland cameras take place. When double or triple queued, an operator is dedicated specifically to Fenland, providing comprehensive surveillance during this time. The patrol plan is adhered to, ensuring the patrol frequency expectations of the service level agreement commitments are met. Since becoming a shared service with Peterborough City Council, patrol numbers have increased and incident numbers and positive outcomes have remained consistent. This highlights the shared commitment to providing an effective and reliable service that benefits both councils. Additionally, we now have dedicated police resources to carry out retrospective media reviews for crimes and incidents in Fenland, something that was not available prior to the merge of Peterborough. This further enhances our ability to respond to Fenland District Council's requirements and provides the overall effectiveness of the service. This structure allows us to maintain a high level of service to meet Fenland District Council's requirements and ensures a strong, responsive and consistent surveillance presence. Do you want to ask any questions on that before we go to the financial side? Because I think I don't have any answer on the financial side other than that's not Peterborough finances and not my thing.
I think that's the best way forward. So Councillor Barber, do you want to come back on the information that Councillor Warwick provided and then we'll go on to your subsequent question?
I would just like specifically to find out about how the council, how the cameras rotate, because it seems, given problems that people have had, that because they rotate in a certain way, when things happen, they're not actually seeing what's happening with theft and so on. I don't know if there's any way that that can be changed.
Can I just come in now and say that we have to be very careful in the way that we discuss this, given the nature of what we are discussing. So could you please bear that in mind in your responses? Councillor Walworth.
So I don't think it needs changing per se. I think what happens is that we catch so much what's happening, and the minute you don't, that's what everyone then clings on to, which is rightfully so. If it was my car or my home that got damaged or something that happened to me, I would have, you know, obviously we're gonna focus on that, but that's not necessarily a problem with the cameras. That's just life, unfortunately. They do sweep. They constantly sweep. The officers that work in the patrol centre have to have set standards. They're marked on it, they're monitored on it. They're not just sitting around with a gear stick, just, you know, doing the cameras. That is very controlled, very appropriate, very comprehensive scanning at all times. I mean, I've spoken to lots of people about cameras previously, and they'll say comments like, well, why can't it see down there? I was like, oh, it's because there's 100 trees there, and you know, we can't see through trees. We can't see around corners. We can only see where the cameras are pointing. Now, especially in Wisbech, we've had a massive growth of cameras. So obviously, if anyone's got any areas where they think are not being covered, we can always look for more funding to put those up. But realistically, I don't think it's a sweep of the cameras that's the problem. I think there's lots of crime, and you can only look certain places at one time.
Thank you, Councillor Walworth. Before I bring Councillor Barber back in, the Chief Exec, Paul Mead, has indicated that he'd like to speak.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think it's a really interesting area to scrutinise. I think all I would say is, I think as lay people, we can often have a lot of more technical questions around the precise operation of CCTV cameras. I know what I've found really helpful in the past is I've actually gone to the control room and had a look, spoken to the operators, seen how the cameras work practically. So I think it's fair to say that if any member of Overview and Scrutiny would welcome a visit to the shared control room in Peterborough, I can see my colleague Dan Hall nodding his head, please let us know and we can organise that for you. You can go in, because I think it really does bring to life the practical application of the cameras, what they pick up on, when they pick up on things, the degree of flexibility, some of the barriers to picking up images. So we'd be more than happy to accommodate a visit to the Joint Control Centre if you think that would be helpful.
Thank you. I absolutely agree, having been and visited myself and found it very beneficial. Councillor Hay would like to come in on this point, and then I'll go back to you, Councillor Barber, to bring the discussion to a close if necessary.
Thank you. It really was just to reiterate what the Chief Executive said. I've been with fellow town councillors to Peterborough and been shown round, and it's marvellous the work they do. And I think it gives you a lot more understanding of how the cameras work and the amount of activity that they do pick up. For being quite a small team relatively, they pick up a lot of things.
Thank you, Councillor Hay. Councillor Barber, would you like to add anything further on this point about the CCTV?
Just to say, I would welcome that opportunity. Thank you.
Would you like to put your question on the financial aspect back to the board again, just to remind them of your question?
Just to say that given the financial problems that Peterborough City Council do seem to be having, I did wonder whether the CCTV coverage would actually continue.
So I'm not privy to comment on Peterborough's finances. Chris?
Councillor Bowden has indicated that he'd like to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm not privy to the details of what goes on. I do hear a lot about their financial position, and Peterborough City Council is not in the strongest financial position of any local authority in the entire country. I think it's fair to say that. However, we have a service level agreement which regulates how these things work. And if the worst were to come to the worst as far as Peterborough City Council is concerned, that service level agreement still would be in place. There still would be an obligation upon Peterborough City Council, even if they weren't any more in control of their own finances, and I'm not going to speculate about that, but even if they were one of the dozens of local authorities which are saying they may need to issue a formal statutory notice about their finances, and I've got no reason to believe that to be the case, but even if they were, that wouldn't alter the fact that we've got a contractual agreement with them, and that contractual agreement will be met. And if it's not met, there would be a liability on the part of Peterborough City Council to us.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Barber, do you want to add anything? Okay, now, I do apologise, Councillor Roy, you did have a second question, didn't you? So would you like to ask that now?
Thank you, Chair. On page 9, there's a reference to savings that were made in TA1, TA2, and further savings. Can you give some clarification that that was carried out through process streamlining as opposed to cutting of services?
Yes, so we aim to make savings through exactly that, process streamlining, working in the back office to try and continue to deliver the service that people expect, but to make the savings that are expected of us. So yes, that is always the aim, and you can see from the report yourself that that's broadly what we've delivered.
Councillor Roy?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Tierney. I was specifically asking you, were there any services that were cut as part of that streamlining process?
Councillor Bowden has indicated that he'd like to speak, but okay.
Were there any services were cut? I can't think of any offhand. I mean, I'm looking at officers who are suggesting I can't remember any. I'm just trying to think. There's a lot of services we deliver. No, I don't think we've cut anything. I mean, obviously we've changed a few things around, doing things a little differently, made some teams work together a bit more effectively and helped them do that. But cut services? No, I don't think we have.
I'll bring in Councillor Bowden now.
Thank you. It's a very good question, Chairman, if I may say so. And this goes back to what the transformation agenda is about. And it is about streamlining, it is about efficiencies, it's about getting the same or better results with less input, whether that input be in terms of staff numbers or in terms of cost. And what it's important to do is to distinguish between two general lines of change that we have been pushing forward for a number of years now. In fact, I was the councillor responsible many years ago for pushing for the first comprehensive spending review. Comprehensive spending reviews are where we look at all of the services that we provide and we collectively ultimately decide, well, should we continue to provide that service or should we continue to provide it at the level that we provide it? Sometimes a comprehensive spending review causes us to increase the amount of service we provide in some cases, but that is where we have the decisions which are made about the amount of service provided, if at all. The transformation agenda is quite different from that. It is about, once you've decided what services you're providing, how will you most efficiently and effectively provide those services? And whilst there's always a connection between what service do you provide and how do you provide it, what we really try to do is to separate out the transformation agenda, which is about the efficiencies, effectiveness, and the comprehensive spending review, which is what outputs do we actually want. So it would be disappointing, not totally surprising, but it would be disappointing if the transformation agenda actually resulted in some reduction in service provision, because that's not what its purpose is. And if that had happened, and I can't think of an example, it might have happened, but I can't think of an example where it had happened, that will have shown that we've just strayed between the demarcation line between the comprehensive spending review and the transformation agenda. We've had 2 lots of comprehensive spending review. We are in the second lot of transformation agenda. These things don't just happen overnight. They don't happen at a click of a finger. They gradually come in over a period of time. And that could make it quite difficult to see the financial effect of it all. But also, it makes it difficult to see that things are actually changing. But they are, they continue to change, they will continue to change. But I'm sure that at some point, we'll be looking at a comprehensive spending review 3. And, although I haven't even thought about it yet, we may well have a transformation agenda 3 as well. But we are where we are at the moment, and so I will emphasise that those are 2 quite different and distinct threads, which we try as hard as possible, and officers try as hard as possible to keep separate, because they are trying to do 2 very different things.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Roy?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of that question really is to show residents that we all come across, they're very quick to pick up on services that councils cut. And given the position of the economy, I think it's clear for us as a council to reassure residents that processes are being streamlined and services are not being cut. Residents quite often, the first thing they will see in any report, and certainly in the newspapers, is that services are being cut and that's it, we're not going to get X, Y or Z. So the purpose of that question really is to reassure people that may be watching the live stream to say that services have not been cut, they are being streamlined. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roy. Peter Catchpole has indicated that he'd like to respond.
I just want to add another sort of quirky thing into this. As part of the reviews is looking at income generation as well when we look at transformation. And just as an example, something quirky here is when we were reviewing, we had a look at boat measuring policy because the length of boats derives income into the marina. And we found that some of those were a bit off. So actually we remeasured all the boats and we've generated an extra few £1,000s worth of income. So we're looking at income generation as part of that. And some of those are quirky as well, but that's a useful example.
Thank you. Councillor Roy, would you like to come back on that?
Yes, thank you for that, Peter. I think anything can be looked at twice, and it just reassures the public that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to come in. A lot of my questions have been answered by way of other members' questions that have been put forward. But there is a question I'd like to ask about the capital equipment replacement programme. As regards to capital equipment replacement programme and technology refresh timelines, do we replace every 2 years or similar? And what preventative measures are in place to stop things going wrong along the way, depending on how often that's looked at, of course? And is there an assigned capital programme for this work? Councillor Tierney.
So in regards to the technology, every 2 years, no. Modern equipment doesn't need to be replaced every 2 years. There's budgets there to replace things if they break, of course, but we look, I think, more to replace things every 4 or 5 years, which is a good length of time for most equipment, laptops and the like, other electronic equipment. So it works quite well, and it looks after the taxpayers' money as well, because if you were too quick to replace everything, you would be spending money that perhaps you could otherwise spend better. So that's the answer to that. And the council has built in right across all its services checks for what will happen in the case of a disaster. So there's always backup equipment that can be used if other equipment isn't working, or you can use equipment together in like a cloud format or like a team so that you can share information across devices. And then we have procedures in place so that if everything went wrong, we know exactly what we'll do to get everything working so that we don't have a disaster. So all of that, there's policies for all of that. You're welcome to ask to have a look at them. We can print them for another meeting if you like, but I think they're pretty robust. We haven't had a disaster we haven't fixed so far, touch wood. Touch wood, yeah. Got to be careful what I say, don't want to tempt fate.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. A kind of related point to that, obviously the big switchover is not taking place until 2027 now. I understand FDC were working to the original 2025 deadline. What's happening now in relation to that? Are you still trying to meet the original deadline, or are you, have you pushed the deadline back? You've relaxed off of it now, it's not until 2027.
No, we're still going for 2025. Everything was in place because that was what we were expecting, so there's no reason to slow it down. We might as well get on and do it. Most of it's done. I think we've got 8 lines or something we haven't done of all the ones we had before. They'll be finished in due course, so we are well on schedule. Everything's going well.
That's what I hoped. Thank you for your response. Now, moving on to the KPIs, how is the customer satisfaction rate gathered? I would like some further clarity. For example, the level of satisfaction in relation to the time it takes to answer calls. Why is that less than 50%? So there's 2 questions. So first of all, how is the satisfaction rate gathered? And then if you could if possible, answer why the satisfaction rate is less than 50% in relation to the time it takes to answer calls. Thank you.
Let me just understand. The first question was how is the actual information gathered? Well, we ask them. So after we've had an interaction with the public, they can fill in a form to say how they felt about that interaction, if they met their expectations. And then there are online forms they can go to at any time to fill in their customer satisfaction. And then we gather that data and we collate it. I think it's probably the best way, because when you've just had an interaction with the council, you're either furious about it or you're pleased with it or whatever. And that's the time to get the information from them, I think, realistically. So I think we can have reasonable confidence in the information we've got, and it's pretty good. In regards to the slightly lower, why are so many answered, a challenging question. I think I'll hand it over to officers here for a better answer on that, because I'm not in contact with the detail.
Thank you, Councillor Tilley. Peter Catchpole.
I would bring Anna up because she's the call centre expert, has been in the past. But I think that the 50% target is for answering calls within 20 seconds. So, and actually we're ahead of that at the end of August 2024. So it doesn't relate to customer satisfaction. That's in relation to answering all calls within 20 seconds. And as opposed to answering all calls, which we do, which is at 97.94%, but we have this specific target to answer within 20 seconds. And that is the 50% target.
Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought it might be helpful to explain something that I do, and I'd actually encourage other councillors to do on occasion. Not too often, but on occasion. And every so often, rather than using one of the direct dial numbers that I've got for an officer, I'll try to, especially if it's something which could be a customer-facing query, I try to get my answer and get the contact via the normal telephone number for FDC. And I see what it is that people are facing, how they're responded to, how quickly they're responded to, and do I manage still to be put through to the right person. And if I'm not, then I get on to officers and tell them I had problems getting in touch, and they make use of that feedback. And occasionally, I think it can be helpful for any councillor to use the main FDC number and see what happens when they try to get through, and if there are problems, to feedback. If things work out well, give some feedback as well. But I think it is quite useful for us as councillors not always to use those shortcuts that we've got available to us, but sometimes, when it's appropriate, to see what our residents experience when they use the main published telephone number. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden, for that tip, and I agree. I think that's an excellent idea. On the going back, I don't know if Peter Catchpole can answer this, but the percentages of contact calls handled are based on a target of 80%, not 100%. So the 90% satisfaction rate is based on a target of 80%. So I wondered why that was set and not 100%. If you could answer that, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think they're two slightly different things, because the customer satisfaction rate is 90% overall, but it isn't about a specific KPI. Whereas the contact centre, there is the 80%, I think that target's too low anyway, and we're currently sitting at 92, just over 92% of all calls that are offered into the call centre. And I think they're two, I don't think we ask customer satisfaction a specific question about the calls and the waiting times. I think we are going to review the KPIs for the call centre, because I think it's more interesting in the calls we're not answering. And what happens to those. So I think 100% answering all calls 100% is good, but actually it's a lot volume driven. So when council tax bills go out, for instance, we have an influx of calls, so it's almost impossible to answer all of them at that time. But we are going to have a review of our KPIs around the call centre to see if we can make them a bit clearer and a bit more challenging, perhaps.
Thank you, Peter Catchpole. Just before I bring in Councillor Tierney, is it standard policy and procedure to have that review every so often anyway?
Well, actually, we just had a task and finish group from Overview and Scrutiny about 2 years ago, which looked at some of those KPIs. But I think with the way we're changing technology, the way we're moving forward, we would like always to improve customer service. So I think we have on ourselves internally that we want to do better. So I think we constantly look at our KPIs.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney.
Yeah, I think so. The answer to the original question was yes, it's still based on the 100 because it's not looking at the KPI at all. In regards to setting new KPIs, as was just mentioned, I was going to say Overview and Scrutiny did do this a couple of years ago, but that doesn't mean you can't do it again. It's always a good idea for new members to feed in things that they think we should be looking at, because then you get the information you need at these meetings and we're held to account and we can make sure we're doing good work. So if ONS want to do some more work on that, I'd welcome the input in my portfolio for sure.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. I'd like to now bring in Councillor Hay. Councillor Barber, you had a question. Your question, Councillor Hay, was already answered. I'm just going through them in systematic order. So, Councillor Barber, you had a question on relationship optimising with the services by the ARP.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as part of any review on the service provided by the ARP and relationship optimising, are you looking at response times via letter rather than telephone? And do you have any sense of what they currently are?
Councillor Bowden.
Again, Chairman, this is really a matter which Councillor French, as the portfolio holder, looks at. So I'll need to respond in her place if that's acceptable to you, Chairman. There are ARP performance indicators. There are a lot of them, and they are monitored monthly. And they are, well, some of them are reported to full council in the portfolio holders briefing report, which is published at every full council meeting. Now, full operational updates are tabled at every joint committee meeting for members, and that's a joint committee of members of local authorities with portfolio holder responsibility who are part of ARP. And those operational updates are also reported at every operational improvement board meeting, which is for the officers. Now, as far as the first ratio is concerned, ARP1 as a performance indicator looks at the number of days taken for new claims and changes to council tax support, and the number of days it takes to process such requests. That currently stands at 11.97 days against a target of 9 days. We have a performance indicator, ARP2, which are the number of days taken for new claims and changes for housing benefit. And that currently stands at 15.19 days against a target of 8 days. So both are below the target. There's a reason for that, or there are reasons for that. In relation to ARP1, the days taken to process new claims for council tax support, and also it has to be said for the housing benefit one, ARP2, the biggest problem or the biggest challenge has been the migration to universal credit. So these files are coming through on a regular and frequent basis to ARP, and they impact quite significantly on staff time. Once almost everyone has been transferred over to universal credit, then of course that pressure will be taken away from us. But so long as we continue to have individuals being transferred over from housing benefit and from council tax support separately into universal credit, so long as that's the process which continues to happen, we'll continue to have this additional pressure. Now, staff have been targeting housing benefit new claims and then the council tax support claims this month as a matter of priority, and assessing these claims has resulted in an increase in the number of days taken to process claims overall. But there are a number of measures which have been put in place to improve the performance in processing times, and including a focus on new claims, reducing the officer time which has been taken as well, and that goes right across the ARP partnership. We've also looked at ARP have looked at the phone rotas to reduce the amount of time people are on the phone and allowing more time for the operatives actually to process claims and to do the reviewing tasks which are needed, to focus on the essential items only, and there's been, therefore, continuing monitoring of the ARP resources. ARP has also continued to test the automation of migration notices, which we're getting increasing numbers of, and it's absolutely essential if the system is to work properly and effectively, it has to work almost all of the time on an automatic basis rather than having individual officers having to re-input data which is sent to them. So that continues to be looked at as we continue to have this rollout to universal credit. Now, in the last couple of weeks, I'm told, we've seen a marked improvement in the outstanding work reports, which is encouraging and which suggests either that the remedial actions being taken are working or that the pressures coming from the rollout to universal credit are reducing, or both. I can't tell which yet based on the information concerned. But we are in the peak leave season at the moment, so we would expect to see a particularly large number of changes coming through, and I'm actually very pleased that we're actually seeing in these last 2 weeks an improvement. 2 weeks, of course, don't make a summer, nor an autumn, nor a winter, but nevertheless, it's going in the right direction. But it's looked at literally on a daily basis at ARP, and this is regularly reported back to officers here at FDC, so that we can ensure that there's nothing significant which is taking place, either for ARP as a whole or specifically for the FDC part of ARP that we need to ring any alarm bells on. So it looks as though that we are on track to see real improvements in performance over the coming weeks, and this should be reflected in the next quarter's performance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Councillor Barber, would you like to come? Okay. Does anyone else have any items for discussion under this agenda item? I see no hands raised. There are no further speakers. Therefore, I would like to thank you for your attendance and the information that you've provided. The next item on the agenda is an update on previous actions identified, and it would appear that there is currently nothing outstanding. So we go on to agenda item 9, and this is the Future Work Programme, which is at pages 51 to 54 of the agenda pack. We are still working to the proposed timetable at present, with the opportunity to add additional items later in the municipal year if required. Agenda item 10, items which the chairman deems urgent. I can confirm that there are none, so this marks the end of the meeting, and I declare the meeting closed. The next meeting of ONS is scheduled to take place on the 2nd of December at 10 a.m. Thank you. Oh, thank you. This is quite, you were right, your prediction.